I grew up on a 26-acre horse farm out in rural Ohio. As a kid, I was a bit of a loner. I'd rather lose myself in books than talk to people, and relationships, well, those weren't really a thing for me. The closest I had were a few girlfriends back in middle school. But does that even count? Honestly, I didn't put much effort into building connections outside of a few close friends. My parents split up when I was young. I lived with my mom and saw my dad every other weekend. That arrangement definitely shaped me, mostly because it meant I didn't grow up with a solid idea of what a healthy relationship looked like. And with so little time spent with my dad, I missed out on having a strong male role model to guide me. Mom went through a string of boyfriends, and let's just say not all of them were winners. Some were downright awful. One of them backhanded me clear across a room when I was 10, and I'd get belted for the smallest things, like leaving something out of place. Then there was the one who used glue traps for mice in the garage. He'd make my brother and me watch as he cut their legs off to free them, leaving the poor creatures alive but legless before tossing them in the trash. That guy was a real piece of work. I learned early on to keep quiet, act polite, and stay out of the way. Speaking up or stepping out of line usually meant getting hit. Over time, that turned into a bad habit of just grinning and bearing it. Never making waves, never addressing problems, and just enduring whatever came my way. When I wasn't dealing with all that, I'd retreat into my books. Reading was my escape. I devoured them, thousands of them stacked on 5 double-layered bookshelves in my room. During the winter, I'd hide in my room with a book as soon as the chores were done. When the weather was nice, I'd read outside, under the trees in the hayfield, or at the old cemetery across the field. It was peaceful, but looking back, it wasn't exactly the healthiest way to live. Through therapy, I've come to realize that my upbringing left me vulnerable to staying with an abusive partner. The survival strategies I developed as a kid, enduring, staying quiet, tolerating bad behavior, set me up to accept the unacceptable in relationships. I met Lauren in my mid-teens. We were both stuck at a church lock-in neither of us wanted to attend. Somehow, we hit it off. She was one of those quirky mid-2000s girls, into weird poetry, yelling spork for no reason, that kind of thing. She had this curly hair that suited her, and I thought she was pretty cute. She challenged me to an air hockey game and, well, you can guess how the rest of that story goes. We started dating exclusively and stayed together for the next 7 years. We finished high school, went to the same college, and even got scholarships to the same local state school. There were ups and downs, but I chalked those up to how relationships worked. She could be erratic, though, crying over little things, hitting me when she was mad, or trying to isolate me from the few friends I had because they were jealous of her taking all my time. She constantly needed validation from everyone around her and wasn't exactly shy about demanding it. I put up with it. She was my first serious girlfriend, and she was great at minimizing her bad behavior, making me feel like I just didn't understand her. I'd shrug it off, thinking she was being irrational, and try to get back to normal. The real red flags started popping up in college. Within a few months, she was hanging around with other guys in the dorm. I'd ask if everything was okay between us, and she'd reassure me, but then I'd find her sitting on some guy's lap later that night. I caught her making out with other guys more than once. When I finally confronted her, she admitted to giving oral to one guy. Her reason? He looks like the guy from Napoleon Dynamite and is just really hot. That line alone should have been the end of us. But we'd been together for almost 5 years at that point, and I thought we could fix things. I told her to cut contact with him, and she did. Things improved for a while. Around this time, I landed a decent job with a construction company and saved enough money to make a down payment on a house. It was 2008 and housing prices were at rock bottom. I talked it over with Elle, and we decided to buy a place near the school and start our life together. We got engaged shortly after moving in, and for a little while it felt like things were looking up. I thought taking her out of the dorm environment would fix her cheating tendencies. And, for a time, it seemed like it did. Life finally felt like it was heading in the right direction. For a while, life felt like it was on track. Lauren got a job selling books and eventually decided to pursue a graduate degree. Actually, she attempted 4 different graduate programs, but she quit each one because it wasn't what she wanted to do. I covered the costs for the ones she couldn't fund through scholarships or student loans, and always supported her decisions. We got a dog, adopted a few cats, and settled into what I thought was a good rhythm. I stayed at the same construction job, despite working under a boss I couldn't stand. Paid the bills, and I told myself that was what mattered. In 2010, when we were both 23, we got married. Looking back, I'd tell any young person, don't rush into marriage. You don't know what a good relationship even looks like at that age. At the time, though, I thought I was living the dream. My days were a predictable routine. Wake up early, kiss Lauren goodbye, and head off to work, where I'd either get yelled at for not being a mind reader or spend hours on job sites wearing myself out. It was a small company, so everyone did a little of everything. After work, I'd come home, let the dog out, and listen to Lauren talk about her day. If I ever mentioned my own frustrations, she'd brush them off, saying I wasn't being manly enough, and that I was just adding to her stress. So, I'd keep my thoughts to myself and move on to making dinner, mowing the lawn, or whatever needed doing. Rinse and repeat. At the time, I thought that was just what life was. Honestly, I even thought it was better than most people's lives. The cracks started showing when Lauren got a new job with a local energy company doing mapping. For the first time, she was earning more than minimum wage. It didn't take long, just a few months, before her boss's boss started taking an interest in her. Within what felt like no time, she was offered a job as a process assistant in a nearby city, about a 2-hour drive away. Around the same time, she began an emotional affair with this new boss, which eventually turned physical. To this day, I can't make sense of it. The guy was 30 years older than her, recently separated from his wife, and literally living in his mom's basement. I started noticing her pulling away from me, but I assumed it was just the stress of a big corporate job and the long commute. I tried to bridge the gap, surprising her with little gifts and putting in extra effort, but nothing seemed to work. I figured she'd adjust to the new job eventually, and things would go back to normal. In January 2013, we moved to Cleveland to be closer to her work. I found a much better job, we got a great deal on a nice place, and, for a little while, life felt shiny and new again. She was getting pay raises and making new work friends. It seemed like she was finally coming out of her shell. But then the late nights started. She'd go out with her work friends more and more, coming home drunk and reeking of alcohol. It led to plenty of fights, but eventually we just fell into a new routine. We talked less, and when we did, it was about the most surface-level things imaginable. By December 2014, we went to visit her parents in Texas. It was a great trip, the kind that reminded me of why we'd gotten together in the first place. Felt like we'd rekindled something we'd been missing. When we got back, I had a moment of clarity. I told her how much I'd enjoyed the trip and that I wanted to invest more in each other, the way we had during our time in Texas. Her response was unexpected. She froze, looked at me with wide, panicked eyes and screamed, a full-on scream. Then, without a word, she bolted to the basement. I followed her, completely confused and trying to figure out what I'd said to provoke that reaction. When I got downstairs, she accused me of cornering her. I backed off immediately, and through her tears, she blurted out, "I don't deserve love." I tried to ask what she meant, but she wouldn't explain. Eventually, we retreated to separate rooms to cool off. The next day, I brought it up again, and she flat out denied it ever happened. She told me, in no uncertain terms, that if I mentioned it again, she'd leave. From that point on, I got suspicious. I didn't think she was cheating, not yet. I figured it was just insecurity, though I'd never seen her this insecure before. After that, I decided to settle. My teenage self had been right. Having a roommate who was occasionally funny and sometimes slept with me was about as good as relationships got. I'd seen what divorce had done to my mom's life, and I had no interest in following that path. So I stayed. I kept quiet. The drinking, the late nights, and the outbursts continued on her end, and I just decided I'd never bring up my feelings unless she asked. In the months leading up to everything falling apart, I decided to focus on improving myself. I figured that if I could become a better, more interesting partner, it might help us reconnect. I started building a home gym, working out regularly, and taking up hobbies I'd always been interested in, like backpacking and woodworking. Lauren had been complaining that I wasn't exciting enough or didn't have any real hobbies, so I thought this was the solution. Instead of talking through our issues, I just threw myself into self-improvement. Looking back, though, it was one of the few good things to come out of that relationship. I'm still physically fit, and woodworking has given me some incredibly useful life skills. D-Day came in April 2015. She stumbled home late one night, absolutely plastered. To this day, I'm not sure how she even made it back in one piece. She threw up multiple times, and I held her hair while she retched. Eventually, she passed out on the floor near the toilet. She was so drunk that her breathing sounded labored and irregular, and I genuinely worried she might stop breathing entirely. I debated calling an ambulance but decided to wait it out and keep an eye on her. Her phone was lying on the floor next to her, buzzing constantly with incoming texts. At first, I ignored it, figuring it was one of her friends checking to see if she'd gotten home safely. After a while, I decided to check. I unlocked the phone with her thumbprint, intending to respond on her behalf. The messages were from her boss. One of the last texts read, "You only went home because you're mad I made you stop. We can't do it in the office anymore. F will catch us." That's when everything clicked. I finally understood what was happening. I felt like the dumbest person alive for not piecing it together sooner. Looking back on the past 2 to 3 years, all the signs were there, but I'd been so naive and disconnected from the reality of my own marriage. I'd assumed we'd just grown distant, but cheating? That had never even crossed my mind. I scrolled through their texts, reading as much as I could stomach. It was clear this had been going on for a while, though I couldn't pinpoint when their relationship crossed the line from professional to emotional, or from emotional to physical. Among the messages, there were photos, shots of her cleavage taken at the bar where they'd been that night, and plans for their next meetup, just a week away. I knew if I confronted her now, she'd turn it around on me. She'd accuse me of snooping, misreading the situation, or misremembering what I'd seen. She'd gaslit me so many times before with that excuse. So, instead, I decided to gather undeniable evidence. The next day, I bought a voice recorder and spent several days figuring out the best way to hide it in her car. I tested its recording time and made sure it would pick up everything clearly. When the day of their meetup arrived, she told me she needed to go to another town for work and that she'd be home late. I told her it was fine, even encouraged her to take her time. Inside, I was a mess of nerves, but I kept it together enough that she didn't suspect anything. Around 6 p.m., I drove to a spot near the bar where they were supposed to meet. Sure enough, there they were, sitting in her car, making out and pawing at each other. I didn't confront them. Instead, I drove home, poured myself a few shots, and cried. Later that night, she came home, all bubbly and cheerful about her meeting, and thanked me for being so understanding. I played along, even making us dinner. Once she went to bed, I retrieved the voice recorder from her car. Listening to that recording was like being hit by a truck. There she was, begging him to take her back to their office to finish what they started. Among other explicit things, the sheer desperation in her voice was chilling. It didn't sound like the person I knew at all. She was like a different person entirely, nearly unhinged in how much she wanted to be with him. After listening to everything, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I woke her up and told her we needed to talk. I asked if she was cheating. She immediately denied it. I asked if she'd been at the bar earlier, and she claimed she didn't even know the place. I told her I'd been there and seen her with her boss. Her reaction was to spiral into panic, asking if I'd followed her, if there was a tracker in her car, and warning me she was about to have a panic attack. I told her I'd read her texts from a few weeks ago and mentioned the bar again. She grabbed her phone and showed me that the texts were gone, clearly thinking this would somehow disprove what I'd seen. Her behavior was so delusional it was almost laughable. Finally, Lauren admitted it. She said she'd been seeing Scott and that they'd been together a few times. Then came the kicker. "If you make me stop seeing him, I won't love you anymore." Somehow that worked on me. Looking back, I can't believe I let it slide. I had no self-confidence. I hated the idea of divorce, and I figured having someone to split the bills with was better than being alone. For a few months, that was the status quo. She'd meet up with him and I'd try, unsuccessfully, to talk her out of it. The situation only got crazier. Scott had other girlfriends and Lauren knew about them, which made her jealous. One time, she came home sobbing, and I hugged her while she cried about thinking Scott was breaking up with her for another woman. I remember standing there, holding her, feeling nothing. It was like all the emotions just shut off, and I was left with this bitter, ironic sense of humor about the whole thing. Still, I didn't leave. To this day, I can't tell you why. Of course, they kept seeing each other, and she even started having one-night stands with random guys. I found out about a few over the years, and I'm sure there were more I didn't know about. Eventually, I developed a full-blown panic disorder. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I gave her the voice recorder I'd used to gather evidence and demanded she use it to record herself breaking things off with S, or I was out. She cried, but she finally agreed. The next day, she called him, and I got to watch as panic set in when Scott realized I knew. The best part? I got to see the texts he sent her through her new Apple Watch. Texts she didn't realize wouldn't delete when removed from her phone. Things calmed down a little after that. We even went to one marriage counseling session, though it was a disaster. Lauren only agreed to go if I promised not to mention her infidelity. The counselor spent the entire session telling me I was smothering her by wanting to check her phone or know where she was. A behavior I only started after the cheating. We never went back. That was 2015 to 2016. Afterward, the cycle continued. About twice a year, I'd find out about another affair. One time, she got drunk and performed oral on a guy she worked with in a bathroom. Another time, during a work trip out of state, she started an emotional affair with a guy whose texts were, honestly, baffling. One of his favorite topics. How his grandmother used to wipe him until his mid-teens and how much he liked it. At some point, the cheating became almost like a game. I'd catch her, we'd fight, she'd swear to stop seeing the guy, and then she'd find new ways to hide things. Disconnecting her Apple Watch, using a different car, or being extra careful about her texts. It became so routine that I just got used to it. I checked out of the relationship entirely, but ironically, we'd still fight about how I wasn't invested enough in our marriage. The breaking point came when I got a message from one of her coworkers' wives. She'd caught her husband texting Lauren and sent me screenshots, and wanted me to know what was going on, and those screenshots hit me like a ton of bricks. They drove home the fact that this wasn't just occasional straying. This was who Lauren was. For years, I'd made excuses for her behavior. Each time, it got easier to rationalize the next betrayal. But reading those messages shattered any illusion I had left. In the texts, Lauren said things like, "I should have done you the first time I saw you," and they were setting up meetings. When I confronted her, her first reaction wasn't guilt or remorse. It was annoyance. She was mad that the guy hadn't hidden their affair better from his wife. She called him too dumb to handle a cheating relationship and complained that he'd broken some imaginary cheater's code of conduct. It blew my mind. That was it. I finally snapped out of it. For the first time in years, I felt awake. I moved into the finished half of the basement, slept on an air mattress near my gym, and started drawing up dissolution papers. I figured if she didn't agree to the dissolution, I'd hire an attorney and file for divorce. In the meantime, I went full-on gray rock, ghosting her as much as I could while living in the same house. Lauren responded with a weird form of love bombing. One day, I came home from work to find she'd bought a lamp for the basement and placed it next to my air mattress. Probably the sweetest thing she'd ever done for me, which says a lot. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A few days later, she was working from home in the afternoon and didn't hear me come into the kitchen. I overheard her on a speakerphone call. It was yes, the same guy who started all of this. I heard him ask if she was alone, and she said yes. I thought, really? Right now, while I'm prepping dissolution papers in the same house, you're talking to this guy. I crept closer and listened. He started talking about how he'd never done it in a car wash and thought that would be fun. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the living room, leaned over the back of the couch, and shouted, "Hi, S. Nice hearing from you." Lauren practically jumped off the couch when I yelled, and S, ever the coward, immediately hung up the call. I couldn't help but laugh as I grabbed my shoes. L, still flustered, shouted, "That was rude. I just laughed again, slipping on my coat. "Where are you going?" she asked, with a nervous edge in her voice. "Out," I replied, short and firm. I must have said it in a way that finally drove home what she refused to acknowledge, that we were done. Not just emotionally or mentally, but completely done. She ran over and blocked the door, planting herself there like a toddler trying to stop a freight train. She gave me this smug little smile, like all of this was still just a game, like standing there would somehow keep me trapped, as if I'd back down and we'd go back to pretending our marriage wasn't already over. Without a word, I grabbed her shoulders, lifted her off the ground, and moved her out of the way. Feet dangling, I placed her gently back on the floor beside the door. "Don't try to stop me," I said, voice calm but with an edge of something she clearly wasn't used to. "I don't have it in me anymore." She must have seen the years of anger I'd buried in my eyes, because she froze. I'd never hurt her, not once, even when she lashed out at me. But that moment must have scared her more than anything I'd ever said or done. I left and drove to one of my favorite local bars. There I hung out with some friends, trying to unwind. On my way, I texted her, letting her know that she had an upcoming work trip and that when she returned, she would not be welcome in the house. Surprisingly, she didn't even try to argue. She didn't come back. Instead, she moved in with some guy she'd been seeing, one of her side flings, no doubt. They lived in his brother's dining room because the guy was unemployed and crashing at his siblings' place. Real winners, huh? Her cheating life was like a treasure trove of bad decisions. The next few months were surreal. She signed the dissolution papers I sent her with barely any pushback. I'd made it clear that if she caused problems, I'd make sure her company knew about the years-long affair with her boss. That little threat got me the house, the car, and a sweet deal on splitting the mountain of credit card debt she'd racked up without my knowledge. Even better, she didn't touch my retirement accounts. Small blessings. When she came back to sign the paperwork in December 2019, she brought the new guy with her. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. He seemed to think I was some abusive monster, and he was there to protect her in case I got violent. Funny, considering I'd never laid a hand on her, even when she'd attacked me. I didn't bother telling him about her cheating. He probably knew, considering he might have been part of it. The last time I saw her was when she came to pack up her stuff. She told me she'd gotten a new apartment, but apparently, the new guy had moved in without asking. She found out when he brought his dad's urn and plopped it on her table. She gave me this desperate "help me" look, and I just laughed. After that, I never saw her again. Within a week of the divorce, I got approached by 2 women at different events who asked for my number. Within a month, I was dating 4 people at once. My friends joked that I had that freshly single glow, and honestly, I was just happy for the first time in years. Eventually, I calmed down on the dating and focused on myself. I doubled down on my fitness routine, traveled to Peru to hike the Cordillera Blanca, and almost got stuck there when COVID hit. I got into woodworking and turning, skills that not only kept me busy but also brought me a lot of joy. Lauren tried to stay in touch, mostly with nonsense texts or updates I didn't ask for. Like how the new guy kept fake proposing to her multiple times a week, driving her crazy. Or how she planned to marry him just for tax reasons. When she found out I'd moved on and gotten engaged, she sent a hand-painted congratulations card. Straight to the trash, that one. Oh, and the cherry on top? New guy was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Somehow, I don't see Lauren finding her compassionate side and sticking around to care for him. That's not who she is. Now, I'm happier, healthier, and surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. Elle's chaos is a distant memory, and honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better ending to that chapter of my life. In August 2020, I met my now wife, Claire. She's truly incredible, kind, thoughtful, and understanding. She had just come out of a rough marriage with a man who was, oddly enough, almost a mirror image of Lauren. We met by chance when I was chatting with a buddy and mentioned, "I'm just looking for someone normal." Claire overheard me, and we both exchanged this funny "me too" look. From there, it just clicked. After 2 amazing years of dating, we tied the knot this past September, and life with her has been nothing short of amazing. We've never had a single fight in the past year. She looks after me, I look after her, and we genuinely connect every single day. It's hard to put into words, but she's the one. Now, as I look back on my life, literally half of it, I often ask myself why I stayed in that toxic relationship with Lauren for so long. I tolerated so much when, in reality, finding someone so perfect like C turned out to be so straightforward once I valued myself. To anyone reading this who might be in a bad relationship and feeling stuck, I want you to know, I've been there. Many of us have. You tell yourself you'll never put up with this kind of behavior, but then you do. You convince yourself that the person you've invested so much in isn't doing these things intentionally, and you make excuses for them. You justify things you never thought you would. And slowly you turn into a doormat. But here's the truth. It's not worth it. Whatever caused someone to cheat once will likely cause them to cheat again, and again after that. Cheaters are experts at justifying their actions to themselves and others. They'll twist things around so that you feel responsible while they feel vindicated. You'll always find yourself questioning their actions when they're not with you. It's exhausting and you deserve better. If you're stuck in that cycle, my advice is simple. Leave. Walk away no matter how much it hurts in the short term. Cut your losses. Take your time to heal, and prioritize yourself. My own fear of divorce and lack of confidence kept me in that destructive relationship far longer than I should have stayed. And guess what? Nothing I endured in those years helped me grow or improved my life in any way. The only person who can move you toward a better headspace is you. Focus on yourself and surround yourself with people who truly care about you. Trust me, it gets better once you leave. Life opens up in ways you can't imagine when you stop settling for less than you deserve.